The first shot rang out just as Grace Parker crested the hill, sending her sprawling from her horse into the dusty Wyoming soil. She hadn't expected death to find her on this spring morning in 1878. Certainly not on her journey to start anew in Sweetwater Springs after fleeing Philadelphia's suffocating society. Yet there she was, heart hammering against her corset, pressing herself into a shallow depression as bullets whistled overhead. "Stay down, miss!" a deep voice commanded from somewhere to her right. Grace turned her head just enough to see a man in a worn leather vest taking aim with a Winchester rifle. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see the determination in his jaw as he fired 3 measured shots in quick succession. The return fire stopped abruptly. "They're running," he called, not lowering his rifle. "But they might circle back." Grace pushed herself up on trembling arms. "Who's they?" "The Blackwell gang." The man finally turned to look at her, and Grace found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen. "They've been hitting travelers on this road for weeks now." "You saved my life," Grace managed, brushing dirt from her traveling dress. "Ethan O'Malley," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you're a long way from anywhere that would spawn a dress like that." Grace straightened her spine. "Grace Parker. I'm headed to Sweetwater Springs to take over my aunt's millinery shop." A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "That's so? Well, Miss Parker, Sweetwater Springs is still 4 hours' ride, and those hills will be crawling with Blackwell's men by nightfall. My ranch is just over that ridge. You'd best come with me until morning." Grace hesitated, weighing her limited options. Her horse had thankfully stayed nearby, grazing unconcerned despite the gunfire. Philadelphia propriety screamed against going anywhere alone with this stranger. But this wasn't Philadelphia, and death had very nearly found her once today already. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. I accept your offer." Ethan nodded once, then moved with surprising grace to retrieve her horse. "Call me Ethan. Out here, formality don't keep you alive, good aim and good neighbors do." The O'Malley ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy main house, a barn, and several corrals. As they approached, Grace noticed 2 ranch hands by the barn watching their arrival with curious eyes. "Gareth, Samuel," Ethan called. "We've got company and possibly trouble. Blackwell's boys are active on the eastern road." The men immediately set to work, one heading to the barn while the other approached to take the horses. "This is Miss Parker," Ethan explained as he helped Grace down from her horse. "She was their target today." The ranch hand named Samuel, a weathered man with kind eyes, touched his hat. "Madam, lucky the boss found you. He's the best shot in 3 counties. Grace felt herself flush slightly under Ethan's gaze. "I'm very grateful." Inside the house, Grace was surprised by the simple but comfortable furnishings. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and worn but clean furniture filled the main room. "It ain't much," Ethan said, seeming to read her assessment. "But it's home." "It's lovely," Grace replied sincerely. "Do you live here alone?" A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "Just me and the hands these days. Had a wife once. Fever took her 5 years back." "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. "I lost my parents to influenza last winter." Ethan nodded, understanding passing between them. "Life out here takes as much as it gives." He moved to a cupboard, pulling out a tin of coffee. "You must be parched. Let me put some coffee on, then I'll show you where you can wash up." As Ethan busied himself with the stove, Grace took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He moved with the confident ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. His hands were calloused but remarkably gentle with the delicate coffee pot. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, with streaks of silver just beginning to thread through the dark hair at his temples. "What brings you all the way from the east?" Ethan asked, glancing over his shoulder. Most folks heading west stop well before Wyoming territory. Grace smoothed her skirts, trying to appear more composed than she felt. My Aunt Harriet passed away 3 months ago. She left me her millinery shop in Sweetwater Springs. With my parents gone and nothing tying me to Philadelphia, it seemed like Providence. A hat shop? Ethan raised an eyebrow. In Sweetwater? Is there something wrong with that? Ethan chuckled. Sweetwater's grown some, but it's still rough around the edges. More saloons than churches, if you take my meaning. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. O'Malley. Never said you were. Just wondering if you know what you're riding into. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Grace. Sweetwater needs civilizing influences, sure enough, but it might not welcome them with open arms. Grace sipped the strong, bitter coffee. And what about you? What brought you to Wyoming? The war. His voice turned flat. After Appomattox, there wasn't much left of the Virginia I knew. Came west with nothing but my daddy's pocket watch and my mother's Bible. Found this land, built this house with these hands. He flexed his fingers around his cup. Out here, a man can make something of himself without the ghosts of the past haunting every step. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan stood. You should rest. Tomorrow at first light, I'll take you to Sweetwater myself. You don't need to do that, Grace protested. Those were Blackwell's men today. They don't give up easy. Ethan's expression hardened. Besides, I need supplies from town anyway. That night, Grace lay in Ethan's bed. He had insisted on taking the chair by the fire, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming night. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and the wind whispered secrets around the eaves of the house. Philadelphia seemed a lifetime away, its brick and cobblestone certainties replaced by this wild, dangerous land. Yet for the first time since her parents' deaths, Grace felt something other than grief and uncertainty. There was something about Ethan O'Malley that made her feel safe despite the dangers he'd described. As sleep finally claimed her, she wondered what kind of woman had been lucky enough to be his wife, and why she found herself envying a woman long dead. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Ethan had the wagon hitched before Grace had finished the simple breakfast of biscuits and bacon his ranch hand Samuel had prepared. Her traveling trunk was secured in the back, and Ethan's rifle rested within easy reach on the seat. We should reach Sweetwater by midday, Ethan explained as he helped Grace onto the wagon seat. The touch of his hand on her waist sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. The journey passed quickly, with Ethan pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. Grace found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn to his dry humor and straightforward manner. That ridge there, Ethan said, pointing to a distant line of hills. That's where the Blackwell gang is likely holed up. They've been terrorizing this area for near on 2 years now. Why doesn't the law stop them? Grace asked. Ethan's face darkened. Sheriff Whitaker tries, but he's one man with a deputy who's barely old enough to shave, and Blackwell has at least 15 gunmen. The territorial governor promised to send marshals, but that was 6 months ago. It must be difficult, living with such danger nearby. You get used to looking over your shoulder. Ethan glanced at her. Though I reckon that's not much different from Philadelphia society, just different weapons. Grace smiled, surprised by his insight. You might be right about that. Sweetwater Springs appeared on the horizon just before noon, a collection of wooden buildings stretching along both sides of a wide main street. Grace's excitement grew as they approached. This would be her home now, her chance to build a new life. Ethan guided the wagon down the dusty street, nodding to people as they passed. It was clear he was well known and respected, as folks called greetings and tipped their hats. Your aunt's shop is just up ahead, Ethan said, pointing to a neat storefront with large windows. A faded sign reading Harriet's Millinery hung above the door. Grace felt a lump form in her throat. She had never met her mother's sister, their falling out having occurred long before Grace was born. Yet Aunt Harriet had remembered her in her will, offering Grace an escape when she needed it most. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her arm. "You sure you'll be all right? I can help you get settled." "I'll be fine," Grace assured him, though in truth, the prospect of being alone in this strange town was daunting. "You've done more than enough already." A flicker of what might have been disappointment crossed Ethan's face. "Well, if you need anything, most folks know how to find me." He hesitated, then added, "I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps I could check on you then." Grace found herself smiling. "I'd like that." As Ethan drove away, Grace turned to face her new home and future, the key to the shop heavy in her hand. The bell above the door tinkled as Grace stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through the windows, illuminating a space both familiar and utterly foreign. Display stands held hats in styles several seasons out of date, and bolts of fabric were stacked neatly on shelves along one wall. Behind the shop was a small living area, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a modest sitting room, and a bedroom with a 4-poster bed covered in a faded quilt. It was simple, far from the luxury of her parents' Philadelphia home, but it was hers. Grace spent the remainder of the day cleaning, throwing open windows to let fresh air chase away the mustiness of disuse. By evening, she had made an inventory of the shop's contents and begun planning the changes she would make. A knock at the door startled her from her work. Opening it cautiously, she found a woman of about 40 standing on the step, a covered basket in her hands. "Welcome to Sweetwater, Miss Parker. I'm Martha Wilson from the general store across the way. Thought you might appreciate a hot meal your first night here." Grace accepted the basket gratefully, detecting the aroma of fresh bread and stew. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Wilson. Martha, please." The woman smiled warmly. "We're informal here. Ethan O'Malley mentioned you were taking over Harriet's place. Your aunt was well respected, though a bit of a mystery. Kept to herself mostly." "You knew her well?" Grace asked eagerly. "As well as anyone, I suppose. She was a fine milliner. Ladies from as far as Cheyenne would order her pieces." Martha looked around the shop. "Place has good bones. Needs some freshening up is all." "That's my plan," Grace confirmed. Would you tell me about Sweetwater? About the people?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "Well now, that's a request that could keep us up all night. Why don't you come to Sunday supper after church this week? You can meet some folks properly." After Martha left, Grace ate the delicious stew and thought about her conversation with the shopkeeper. It seemed Sweetwater might be more welcoming than Ethan had suggested. Ethan. Her thoughts kept returning to him, to the intensity in his blue eyes and the gentleness of his hands. It was foolish, she knew. She had just met the man, and she was here to build a business, not to moon over a rancher, no matter how handsome. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Grace cleaned the shop thoroughly, rearranged displays, and began working on new hat designs. Her fingers remembered the skills her mother had taught her, and soon colorful creations adorned the once dusty stands. On Saturday morning, she hung a grand opening sign in the window. Within an hour, curious women began to trickle in, some simply to meet the newcomer, others genuinely interested in refreshing their wardrobes. By midday, Grace had sold 3 hats and taken orders for 5 more. She was explaining the virtues of a particular feather trim to Mrs. Tompkins, the banker's wife, when the bell above the door chimed. Ethan stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable surrounded by feminine finery. His eyes found hers immediately, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart skip. "Mr. O'Malley," she greeted him, conscious of Mrs. Tompkins's interested gaze. "How nice to see you again. Miss Parker." He nodded, his eyes taking in the transformed shop. "Looks like you're settling in just fine." Mrs. Tompkins glanced between them with undisguised curiosity. "I'll take the blue hat, Miss Parker. My husband will be by later to settle the account." She gathered her shawl. "Ethan, do give my regards to Gareth and Samuel." After she left, Ethan stepped further into the shop. "I see you've met the formidable Mrs. Tompkins. Her approval means you've been accepted by Sweetwater society, such as it is." Grace laughed. "She's purchased my most expensive hat, so I'm inclined to think well of her." She moved to close the shop door, turning the sign to "Closed for lunch." "Have you eaten?" "I was just about to have some tea and sandwiches." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome, thank you." In the small kitchen, Grace felt suddenly self-conscious as she prepared a tray. Ethan seemed to fill the space with his presence, making the room feel smaller than it was. "You've worked wonders with the place," he commented, watching her movements. "Hardly recognize it from the dusty shop I remembered." "Thank you. It feels like home already." Grace set the tray on the small table. "Please sit." They ate in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan spoke again. "I came to warn you. There's word Blackwell's gang hit a stagecoach yesterday, about 15 miles south. They're getting bolder." Grace felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. "Do you think they'll come to Sweetwater?" "Not likely. Even Blackwell isn't fool enough to raid a whole town." Ethan's expression was grave. "But it means the roads aren't safe. You shouldn't travel alone, especially not back to my ranch." Grace blinked in confusion. "Your ranch? Why would I go there?" A flush crept up Ethan's neck. That is, I hoped you might accept an invitation to Sunday dinner tomorrow. After church, of course." "Oh." Grace felt heat rise to her own cheeks. "That's very kind. But I've already accepted an invitation from Martha Wilson." Was that disappointment in his eyes? "Another time, perhaps," he said evenly. "I would like that," Grace replied, meaning it. When Ethan left an hour later, having helped her move a heavy display cabinet, Grace found herself standing at the window, watching his tall figure stride down the street. She told herself it was simply gratitude she felt, appreciation for his kindness to a stranger. But she knew even then that it was something more. Sunday dinner at the Wilsons introduced Grace to a dozen more Sweetwater residents, including Sheriff Whitaker, a grim-faced man with tired eyes who spoke little but observed much. Martha's husband, George, regaled the table with tales of the town's early days, when it had been little more than a trading post. "Of course, everything changed when they found silver in the hills," George explained, gesturing with his fork. "Town grew overnight. Some good folks, some not so good. Like Blackwell," someone muttered. The mood at the table darkened. Sheriff Whitaker sighed heavily. "Got word this morning. The territorial governor's finally sending help. 2 marshals should be here by the end of the month." "About time," George grumbled. "After what they did to the Carter place. Burning them out like that." Grace listened, anxiety growing. The danger Ethan had spoken of seemed very real indeed. "Don't you worry, Miss Parker," Martha said, noticing her expression. "Sweetwater proper is safe enough. And you've made quite an impression already. 3 ladies asked me about your hats just this morning after church." The conversation turned to lighter topics, but Grace couldn't shake her unease. As she walked back to her shop after dinner, she found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. The next few weeks established a rhythm to Grace's new life. The shop flourished as word spread about her designs. She rose early each morning, working on new creations before opening the doors at 9. Ladies from Sweetwater and surrounding ranches became regular customers, often lingering to gossip and share news. And every Saturday, Ethan O'Malley would appear, ostensibly to purchase supplies but always finding time to stop by her shop. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fresh eggs from his chickens, wildflowers he'd picked on the ride in, once a beautiful piece of blue ribbon he'd ordered specially from Cheyenne. Grace found herself looking forward to these visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. Ethan was different from the men she had known in Philadelphia, straightforward where they had been calculating, genuine where they had been performative. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. One Saturday in late June, Ethan arrived later than usual, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Grace asked as soon as he entered the shop. "Blackwell hit again last night. A family homesteading about 10 miles north." His voice was tight with anger. "They're getting closer to town." Grace felt fear curl in her stomach. Were they hurt? They got away, thankfully. But Blackwell burned their cabin to the ground. Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Sheriffs gathered a posse. They're riding out at dawn." "You're going with them," Grace stated, knowing it wasn't really a question. Ethan nodded grimly. "Every able man is needed." Grace moved closer, laying a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Ethan. Please." His eyes softened as he looked down at her, and for a moment, she thought he might pull her into his arms. Instead, he covered her hand with his own. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice lower. "There's a social dance next Saturday evening. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Joy bubbled up in Grace's chest, momentarily chasing away her fear. "I would be delighted." A genuine smile broke through Ethan's somber expression. "Then I have extra reason to come back safe." The posse returned 3 days later, dusty and defeated. They had tracked the Blackwell gang into the mountains but lost the trail in the rocky terrain. Ethan stopped by the shop briefly to let Grace know he was back, but he was exhausted and preoccupied. "They're planning something bigger," he told her. Blackwell wouldn't risk coming this close to town unless he had a target in mind. "What could he want in Sweetwater?" Grace asked. "The bank, maybe, or the silver shipment that comes through next month." Ethan shook his head. "Whatever it is, we'll be ready." Despite the lingering threat, excitement built in Sweetwater for the social dance. It was a quarterly tradition, bringing in folks from miles around for an evening of music, dancing, and socializing. Grace spent hours creating a special dress for the occasion, using fabric she had ordered from Denver. The deep blue material complemented her eyes, and the style was more fashionable than anything Sweetwater had seen before. On the evening of the dance, as she was putting the finishing touches on her hair, a knock sounded at the shop door. Expecting Ethan, she hurried to answer it, her heart fluttering with anticipation. Instead, she found Sheriff Whitaker standing on her doorstep, his expression grave. "Miss Parker," he began, twisting his hat in his hands. "I'm afraid I have bad news. There was an incident at the O'Malley Ranch this afternoon. Blackwell's men." The world seemed to tilt beneath Grace's feet. "Ethan? Is he?" "He's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly. "But he's been shot. Doc Bennett's with him now at his ranch. He asked me to come tell you he won't be able to escort you tonight." Relief warred with fear in Grace's heart. "How badly is he hurt?" "Bullet caught him in the shoulder. Lost some blood, but Doc says he'll recover." The sheriff hesitated. "He's more worried about his ranch hands. 2 of them were wounded as well, one pretty bad. They were defending the north pasture when Blackwell's men tried to steal horses." "I need to go to him," Grace said, already reaching for her shawl. "Miss Parker, that's not wise. The road isn't—" "Sheriff Whitaker," Grace interrupted, drawing herself up with all the dignity her Philadelphia upbringing had instilled. I will be going to the O'Malley Ranch tonight. You may escort me, or I will find my own way there." The sheriff studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I'll hitch up my wagon." The ride to Ethan's ranch seemed interminable. Darkness had fallen, and every shadow in the trees seemed to hide potential danger. Sheriff Whitaker kept his rifle across his lap and his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. When they finally arrived, the ranch was ablaze with lantern light. Doc Bennett's buggy stood outside the main house, and several horses Grace didn't recognize were tethered nearby. The sheriff helped her down from the wagon. "Those are Marshall's mounts," he explained, nodding toward the unfamiliar horses. "They arrived yesterday from Cheyenne." Inside, the house was crowded with men Grace didn't know. She spotted Samuel sitting at the table, his arm bandaged. He nodded to her in recognition. "Miss Parker," he greeted her. "Boss is in his room. Doc's with him." Grace made her way through the throng of men, some of whom she recognized from town. At Ethan's bedroom door, she hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in," called a voice that wasn't Ethan's. She entered to find a gray-haired man packing medical supplies into a black bag. Ethan lay on the bed, his upper body bare except for bandages wrapped around his left shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Grace," he said, attempting to sit up. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Lie still," Dr. Bennett commanded, placing a restraining hand on Ethan's good shoulder. "Miss Parker, perhaps you can convince this stubborn man to follow doctor's orders. He's lost blood and needs rest, not to be trying to mount another posse." Grace approached the bed, her heart aching at the sight of Ethan's injury. "The sheriff brought me. I had to see for myself that you were all right." Ethan's expression softened. "I'm sorry about the dance." "The dance doesn't matter." Grace sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "What happened?" While Dr. Bennett finished his packing, Ethan explained how Blackwell's men had attempted to steal his prized horses. They picked the wrong day. The marshals were at the ranch getting information about Blackwell's movements. "We drove them off, but not before they got some shots in." "One of your men is badly hurt?" Ethan's face darkened. "Gareth took a bullet meant for me. It's bad, but Doc thinks he'll pull through." After the doctor left, Grace remained at Ethan's side. The house gradually quieted as the marshals departed with the sheriff to continue planning their pursuit of Blackwell. "You really shouldn't be here," Ethan said again, though his hand had found hers on the quilt. "But I'm glad you are." "So am I." Grace squeezed his fingers. "Is there anything you need? Can I get you some water or food?" "Just stay a while longer," he murmured, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and what might have been laudanum. "You look beautiful. I'm sorry I ruined your evening." "You didn't ruin anything." Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake up." Ethan's eyes drifted closed, but his hand maintained its gentle grip on hers. Grace sat watching the rise and fall of his chest, her mind a tumult of emotions. She had known this man for barely 2 months, yet the thought of losing him was unbearable. Somewhere between his rescue on the road and tonight, Ethan O'Malley had become essential to her happiness. Samuel looked in on them later, bringing Grace a cup of coffee and a blanket. "You should get some rest too, Mississippi. There's a spare room you can use." "I'll stay here a while longer," Grace replied softly. Samuel nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "Boss is lucky to have someone who cares so much. Been too long alone, that one." When he'd gone, Grace gently brushed a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead. "I do care," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear. "More than I should, perhaps." The next morning dawned clear and bright, at odds with the tension that filled the ranch. Grace had finally moved to the spare room in the early hours, leaving Ethan sleeping peacefully. Now she stood in his kitchen, preparing breakfast alongside Samuel, who seemed grateful for the help. "How is Gareth this morning?" she asked, slicing bread. "Holding his own," Samuel replied. "Doc's coming back to check on him later." The sound of boots on the porch alerted them to visitors. Sheriff Whitaker entered, followed by two stern-faced men wearing marshal's badges. "Miss Parker," the sheriff acknowledged her with a nod. "How's O'Malley this morning?" "Still sleeping when I checked on him earlier," Grace answered. "The doctor said he needs rest." "Well, he's about to be disturbed," said the taller of the two marshals. "We need to talk to him. Now." Something in the marshal's tone made Grace bristle. "He's been shot defending his property, Marshal. Surely whatever you need can wait a few hours." The man's eyes narrowed. "Madam, we have information that Blackwell is planning to hit the bank in Sweetwater tomorrow. Every minute counts." A voice from the doorway interrupted them. "I'm awake." Ethan stood there, looking pale but determined, a shirt hanging unbuttoned over his bandaged shoulder. "Let's talk." Grace hurried to his side. "You should be in bed." Ethan's good arm slipped around her waist. Whether for support or comfort, she wasn't sure. "I've had worse, Grace." To the marshals, he said, "Let's sit down. Samuel, coffee for our guests." The next hour was filled with strategy and planning. The marshals, introduced as Marshal Burke and Marshal Donovan, had a witness, a former member of Blackwell's gang who had turned informant in exchange for leniency. "He says Blackwell's planning to hit the bank tomorrow during the midday lull," Marshal Burke explained. "They've got someone on the inside, a teller who's been feeding them information." "Jenkins," Sheriff Whitaker spat. "Always thought that Weasel was up to no good." "We need to set a trap," Marshal Donovan continued. "But we need men we can trust. O'Malley, despite your injury, we could use you." Ethan nodded grimly. "I'll be there." "Ethan, no," Grace protested. "You're in no condition to face gunmen." His eyes met hers, filled with resolve. "Blackwell needs to be stopped, Grace. For all our sakes." He turned back to the marshals. "But Grace needs protection. If Blackwell knows I was involved in stopping the horse theft, he might target her to get to me." Marshal Burke nodded. "We'll post a man at her shop." "No," Ethan said firmly. "She stays here at the ranch where it's safer. Samuel and the other hands can protect her and Gareth." Grace wanted to object, to insist that she could take care of herself, but the logic of Ethan's argument was sound. If Blackwell was as dangerous as everyone claimed, her shop in the middle of town would be too vulnerable. After the marshals and sheriff departed, Ethan sagged against the table, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "You shouldn't have gotten out of bed," Grace scolded gently, helping him back to his room. "Had to," he replied, wincing as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Blackwell needs to be stopped, Grace. He's threatened everything and everyone I care about." His eyes held hers, and the message in them was clear. She was included in that statement. "Let me help you with your shirt," she said softly, moving to unbutton it. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against his chest. Ethan caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. "Grace, I need to say something. In case things don't go well tomorrow." "Don't," she whispered, tears threatening again. "Don't talk that way. I have to." His voice was rough with emotion. "I lost someone once because I didn't say what needed saying. I won't make that mistake again." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Grace Parker. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you picking yourself up off the ground after those shots were fired. You're the bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." Joy and fear tangled in Grace's heart. "Ethan, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted. It's too soon, I know that. But I needed you to know, before I ride out tomorrow. Grace placed her free hand against his cheek. It's not too soon. Not for how I feel. She leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to his. I love you too, Ethan O'Malley. His arm came around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. For a moment, the danger awaiting them tomorrow faded away, leaving only this connection, this perfect understanding between them. When they parted, Ethan's eyes were bright with emotion and something that looked like wonder. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he murmured. After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. I understand, Grace said softly. After losing my parents, I felt so alone. That's why I came west to find a new beginning. I never expected to find you. Ethan smiled, touching her cheek tenderly. Now I have even more reason to come back safe tomorrow. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. Despite Grace's protests, Ethan insisted on riding into town with the others. His determination was matched only by his obvious pain, which he tried unsuccessfully to hide as Samuel helped him into his coat. You can barely lift your arm, Grace argued, watching him wince. How do you expect to handle a gun? I can shoot with my right arm just fine, Ethan replied, checking his revolver before holstering it. And I'll mostly be providing eyes and information. The marshals and the sheriff will handle the actual confrontation. Grace wasn't convinced, but she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. This was a battle she wouldn't win. Before mounting his horse, Ethan drew her aside. Promise me you'll stay here with Samuel. No matter what you hear, no matter how long we're gone. I promise, she said, though the words tasted bitter. But you have to promise to come back to me. Ethan's kiss was fierce and quick. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. After they left, the ranch fell into an eerie quiet. Grace tried to keep busy, checking on Gareth, helping Samuel with chores, anything to keep her mind off the danger Ethan was facing. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were stretched to breaking. Shouldn't we have heard something by now? She asked Samuel as they sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee growing cold between them. News travels slow sometimes, Samuel replied, though the crease between his eyes betrayed his own worry. Bank don't close till 3. Could be they're still waiting for Blackwell to make his move. A distant sound caught their attention, hoofbeats, approaching fast. Samuel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Stay inside, he ordered, moving to the window. Grace's heart pounded as she joined him, peering through the glass. Relief flooded through her as she recognized the rider. It's Ethan, she cried, hurrying to the door. But as he drew closer, she saw that something was wrong. He was slumped in the saddle, and there was fresh blood staining his shirt. Samuel, Grace called, running toward the approaching horse. He's hurt. Ethan nearly fell into their arms as they helped him from the saddle. His face was ashen, and blood seeped through his bandaged shoulder. Inside, he gasped. Quickly, they might be coming. They half carried him into the house, where he collapsed onto a chair. Water, he requested, his voice raspy. Grace brought him a cup, which he drank greedily. What happened? Where are the others? Ambush, Ethan said grimly. Blackwell never intended to rob the bank. It was a trap. He winced, pressing a hand to his wound. The informant was working for him all along. Let us right into it. The sheriff? The marshals? Samuel asked. Burke is dead. Donovan and Whitaker are pinned down in the mercantile with some townsmen. Ethan's eyes found Grace's, filled with anguish and determination. Blackwell has 5 men heading this way. He knows about us, Grace. Wants to hurt me by hurting you. Fear clawed at Grace's throat. How many men do we have here? Just me and Samuel, Ethan replied. Gareth can't fight in his condition. The other hands are with the herd in the south pasture, too far to call back in time. Samuel's weathered face set in grim lines. 2 against 5 ain't good odds, boss. 3, Grace corrected firmly. I can shoot. Both men stared at her in surprise. My father insisted I learn, she explained. Said a woman alone should know how to defend herself. I'm not expert, but I can hit what I aim at. A mixture of pride and concern crossed Ethan's face. Grace, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, she interrupted. I'm telling. This is my home now too, and I will defend it. Something shifted in Ethan's eyes at her words, a recognition, perhaps, of the life they could build together if they survived this day. All right, he conceded. Samuel, get the rifles from the gun cabinet. Grace, help me to the front window. It has the best view of the approach. The next hour was spent in tense preparation. Doors were barricaded, windows secured. Grace helped change Ethan's bloodied bandages, her hands steady despite her racing heart. They'll come at dusk, Ethan predicted, checking the loads in his revolver. When the light's tricky and they can use the shadows. What about Gareth? Grace asked. He can't defend himself. We'll move him to the root cellar, Samuel suggested. It's the safest place if bullets start flying. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the yard, Ethan took Grace's hand. There's still time for you to hide in the cellar with Gareth. Grace shook her head. My place is with you. The first warning came from Ethan's dog, a black and white border collie that began barking furiously outside. Seconds later, they heard the distant thunder of approaching horses. Here they come, Ethan murmured, positioning himself at the window. Remember, wait until they're in range. Make every shot count. Grace took a deep breath, steadying the rifle against her shoulder as Samuel had shown her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was iron. 5 riders appeared at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the dimming sky. They spread out, approaching from different angles. Smart, Ethan muttered. They're making it harder for us to target them all. He glanced at Grace. I'll take the 2 on the left. Samuel, the 2 on the right. Grace, the one in the middle, that'll be Blackwell himself. The riders were within 100 yards now, still advancing cautiously. Grace could make out the leader's features, a hawk-nosed man with a cruel twist to his mouth and a black hat pulled low over his eyes. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the approaching men. Bullets thudded into the walls of the house, splintering wood and shattering a window. Hold steady, Ethan commanded. Let them waste ammunition. Wait until they're closer. Grace's heart hammered in her chest as she sighted down the barrel of her rifle, tracking Blackwell's approach. 50 yards. 40. 30. Now! Ethan shouted, and 3 rifles roared in unison. One of Blackwell's men toppled from his horse immediately, caught by Samuel's shot. Another reeled in his saddle, wounded by Ethan's bullet. Grace's shot missed Blackwell but struck his horse, which reared in pain, throwing its rider. Reload, Ethan ordered, working the lever of his Winchester with practiced efficiency despite his injured shoulder. The remaining outlaws returned fire, forcing them to duck below the windowsills. Glass shattered overhead, raining down on them. They're splitting up, Samuel called from his position. 2 heading for the barn, 1 for the back door. I'll take the back, Ethan decided quickly. Samuel, stay here with Grace. Cover the front. Before Grace could protest, Ethan was moving, hunched low, toward the rear of the house. The wound in his shoulder was clearly paining him, but determination drove him forward. For what seemed like an eternity, Grace and Samuel exchanged fire with the men outside. Another of Blackwell's gang fell to Samuel's accurate shooting, but the remaining two had found cover behind the water trough and a stack of firewood. Then came the sound Grace had been dreading, gunshots from the back of the house, followed by a cry of pain that could only be Ethan's. "Ethan!" she called, her voice breaking with fear. "Stay put," Samuel ordered. "You go running back there, you're liable to get yourself killed." Grace knew he was right, but every instinct screamed at her to go to Ethan. She forced herself to remain focused, firing at the men in front to keep them pinned down. A thunderous crash from the back of the house told her someone had broken in. More gunfire followed, and then an eerie silence. "Ethan?" she called again, desperation edging her voice. No answer came. Samuel met her eyes, his face grim. "I'll check. You keep these varmints busy." Before he could move, however, a new sound reached them, more hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast. "That'll be Blackwell's reinforcements," Samuel muttered, checking his dwindling ammunition. But when Grace risked a glance out the shattered window, she saw the sheriff's badge glinting in the fading light. "It's Whitaker and the marshal." Relief surged through her as the sheriff's posse surrounded the remaining outlaws, forcing their surrender. The moment it seemed safe, Grace dropped her rifle and ran toward the back of the house, terror clutching at her heart. The kitchen door hung from broken hinges. Inside, furniture was overturned, and bullet holes punctured the walls. And there on the floor lay two men, Blackwell, face down and unmoving, and Ethan, slumped against the wall, his shirt soaked with fresh blood. "Ethan!" Grace fell to her knees beside him, frantically searching for signs of life. His eyes fluttered open at her touch, focusing slowly on her face. "Grace," he whispered, "you're safe. Don't talk," she urged, tearing strips from her petticoat to press against his wounds. "Save your strength." "Blackwell?" he asked weakly. "Dead," she confirmed, glancing at the outlaw's still form. "You got him." A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's pale lips. "Good. They needed more than me." "What?" Grace asked, confused by his words. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "The town. They needed more than just me fighting for them. They needed you, your courage, your heart." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks as she understood. "Then let me be the more," she whispered, echoing words she hadn't realized held such meaning. "For you, for Sweetwater, for all of us." Sheriff Whitaker burst in then, followed by Marshal Donovan and several townsmen. "Doc Bennett's right behind us," the sheriff announced, kneeling beside them. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Grace replied, not taking her eyes from Ethan's face. "But he's strong. He'll pull through." "Course I will," Ethan murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. "Got too much to live for now." The next few days were a blur of anxiety and hope. Doc Bennett removed 2 bullets from Ethan's body and declared him the stubbornest patient in the territory, when he refused laudanum in order to stay alert. Grace barely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed and helping Samuel manage the ranch as best she could. Neighbors and townspeople came by with food and offers of assistance, many expressing their gratitude for Ethan's role in ending Blackwell's reign of terror. Marshal Donovan confirmed that the entire gang had been either captured or killed. "Territory's a safer place now, thanks to you folks," he told them the day before he departed for Cheyenne with the prisoners. A week after the shootout, Ethan was sitting up in bed, color returning to his face, when Grace brought him lunch on a tray. "You don't have to keep waiting on me," he protested, though his eyes followed her movements with undisguised affection. "You must be neglecting your shop something terrible." "Martha Wilson is keeping it open for me a few hours each day," Grace replied, settling beside him on the bed. "Business can wait." You're more important. Ethan caught her hand, his expression growing serious. Grace, there's something I need to ask you. Her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. These past days, having you here, it's made me realize what I want for my future. For our future, if you'll have me. He took a deep breath. I love you, Grace Parker. I want to build a life with you, run this ranch together, maybe raise a family someday. Will you marry me? Joy burst like sunshine in Grace's heart. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, Ethan O'Malley. I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he pulled her close for a tender kiss. When they parted, he said, I don't have a ring yet. As soon as I can ride into town. I don't need a ring, Grace interrupted. I just need you, whole and healed. Nevertheless, Ethan insisted. You deserve the best I can give you, and I intend to spend the rest of my life doing just that. They were married 2 months later, on a perfect September day. The ceremony took place at the ranch, under an arch of wildflowers that Samuel and the other hands had constructed. Half of Sweetwater turned out to witness the union, and Martha Wilson wept openly when Grace appeared in a gown of ivory silk that she had sewn herself. Sheriff Whitaker gave the bride away, and Gareth, recovered enough to stand though still using a cane, served as best man. The new minister, who had arrived in Sweetwater just weeks before, pronounced them husband and wife as the setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light. At the reception that followed, townsfolk and ranchers alike celebrated not just the marriage, but also the peace that had come to their community with Blackwell's defeat. There was dancing in the yard, music from fiddles and guitars, and enough food to feed an army. As twilight deepened, Ethan led Grace away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. His arms encircled her waist as they watched stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Happy, Mrs. O'Malley? He murmured against her hair. More than I ever thought possible, Grace replied, leaning into his embrace. Though I think my aunt would be scandalized to know her proper Philadelphia niece ended up married to a cowboy. Ethan chuckled. From what I've heard about Harriet, I think she'd approve. She came west for the same reason you did, to find freedom, to make her own way. Grace turned in his arms to face him. I found so much more than that. I found home. I found you. And I found the missing piece of my heart, Ethan replied, his voice rough with emotion. After Sarah died, I thought I'd live out my days alone. Then you appeared, covered in dust but still somehow the most elegant woman I'd ever seen, and everything changed. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with shared passion and promise. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the stars were fully out, a canopy of diamond light above them. They're waiting for us to cut the cake, Grace said softly, though she made no move to leave his embrace. Let them wait a bit longer, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. I want to remember this moment forever, just you and me and the stars, at the beginning of our life together. In the years that followed, Sweetwater Springs grew from a rough frontier town into a thriving community. Grace's millinery expanded to include a dress shop that became known throughout the territory for its fashionable designs. Ethan's ranch prospered as well, with a reputation for the finest horses in Wyoming. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Ethan's first wife, was born almost exactly a year after their wedding. A son, Michael, followed 2 years later, and eventually another daughter, Elizabeth. Their home rang with children's laughter and grew in warmth with each passing season. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Grace with a gift, the deed to her shop building, which he had secretly purchased from the previous owner. Now you truly own your business, free and clear, he told her as she examined the document with tears in her eyes. You didn't need to do this, she protested weakly. Everything I have is already yours. And everything I have is yours, he replied. But you built that business with your own hands and talent. It should belong to you alone. Grace hugged him fiercely. How did I get so lucky? Ethan smiled, stroking her hair. I ask myself the same question every morning when I wake up beside you. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing, watching the moon rise over the hills that had once hidden their enemies and now sheltered their peace. Do you ever think about that day? Grace asked quietly. When Blackwell came? Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders. Sometimes, not the fear or the pain, but what you said to me. About being the more. Grace smiled at the memory. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever you need, whatever our children need, whatever this community needs, I want to be that. You already are, Ethan assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. You're the heart of this ranch, this family. The best decision I ever made was stopping to help a city girl in trouble on the road from Cheyenne. And the best decision I ever made was falling in love with a Wyoming cowboy, Grace replied, turning her face up for his kiss. As their lips met under the vast Wyoming sky, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they needed, not just love, but completion. In this wild land that demanded so much of those who sought to tame it, they had discovered that together they were more than enough. They were everything.